So now that we're talking about the IAT, at least the black-white IAT, um, this does have implications for assessing our implicit attitudes, but only if it's a good measure. So what we know is that the IAT is extremely not face valid, which is good. Remember, face validity is, does the measure look like it's supposed to? And we don't want it to look like it's supposed to. Like, we don't want a face valid measure here, because once people figure out what we're actually measuring, then that's when the lying begins. So we don't want that. So instead, we don't want a face valid measure, and that's a good thing about the IAT. But the question is it a valid measure? So it doesn't measure what it's supposed to. So the previous let's just do that. The previous slide right here by Greenwald showed that, yeah, it does measure what it's supposed to. You see differences between white and black participants. But now the question is, does it predict behavior? So here's what McConnell and Liebel did. What they did is they completed questionnaires, like explicit measures of racism, and the black-white IAT. All right, so we have explicit and implicit measures. And then the participants met a black experimenter who asked them questions about the study. Now, the conversation between the white participant and the black experimenter was recorded. Now, the questions that the black experimenter asked were about the study, and the study is about racism and race issues. So you got to imagine that as a white participant, this probably feels a little uncomfortable. All right, and here's what we see. All right, so what happened is, because this conversation was recorded, video recorded in particular, what judges did, so people who watched the videotape, what they did is they rated the conversation and measured a lot of things. They measured speaking time, how much did the person smile, were there speech errors, speech hesitations, did you talk about social issues? And what you see is these numbers here. So these numbers are correlation coefficients. Remember, I'm never going to test you on these numbers, but you do need to know the general pattern. This is for the explicit ratings of prejudice. So this is, remember, like on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you dislike black people? And what you see is that, sure enough, none of them correlate significantly with any of the 5 judges' ratings on the left. And you know that because there's no star, there's no asterisk next to the numbers that I circled here. And what this suggests is that there is no relationship. Nothing's happening. But look at the IAT score. All those are significant. And what you see is that when you compare 0.51 to its counterpart over here, it's higher. This is higher than this. 0.42 is higher than 0.05. And you have these higher numbers on the IAT. And what happens is, this is a positive correlation between the IAT score and all these things, such that as your implicit attitude suggests that you dislike blacks and like whites, okay, when that happens, you make more speech errors. You have more speech hesitations, which are like ums, hums. You smile more, you speak more, and you talk about social comments more. Now, you may say, Chris, this is a good thing. Look, they're smiling at the black experimenter. They're talking to them more. But think about this. And this is what McConnell and Liebel said. What happens when you're really nervous? You smile. You ramble. You make speech errors and speech hesitations. And so what's happening is the participants are really nervous because they're talking to a black experimenter about race issues. And guess what? The IAT picks that up. It picks up those subtleties that the explicit ratings don't. And my guess is that it's because the explicit ratings, if you're like, are you a racist? You're like, no. On a scale of 1 to 5, I'm at 0. No. Like, I'm off the scale. But for the IAT score that actually picks up these subtle differences because they're implicit, you see it here. So the IAT has been argued to be one of the best measures of implicit attitudes because of the lack of face validity, which is good in this case, the content validity, which is good. That's the previous study by Greenwald. And then the fact that it predicts behaviors, like the McConnell and Liebel shows. Right? But the IAT has been criticized. All right, it's been criticized because some people would argue that it's not your implicit attitudes that it's measuring. It's more like cultural knowledge. Let me give you an example of what we mean by cultural knowledge. So if you've ever seen the TV show Cops, which apparently is still on, like new episodes are still on to this day. What you used to see is cops. So it's a TV show, it's a reality show. They would follow police officers around making arrests. And what they would always see is that the person who was arrested was always a black man. Or always a black man. And so what happens now is, let's say that you watched a lot of shows like Cops, and you've just learned that because of the media, that black people are criminals. And that's your schema. And what's going to happen is maybe the IIT is picking up that, not your own attitudes, but just your schemas based on the media or whatever. And that's a valid argument. Like the IIT cannot parse that apart. However, I think it's a good implicit measure. So because it does have criticisms, we need to find other measures. And this is a funny one. This is called the bogus pipeline. The bogus pipeline is a machine. So this is a study by Plant, Devine, and Brazy. And what the bogus pipeline is participants are brought into the lab, and they are told that they are going to write about their stereotypes of black people. All right? So basically, think of a black person, write down anything you want. The bogus pipeline, though, so they did this under 3 conditions. The first was privately. So privately, it was all anonymous. They got to write down their answers and just kind of like, hide. So they could, in other words, they could freely write what they wanted because the researcher would have no idea it's them. All right, that's the private condition. The public condition was when the participant had to verbally say out loud what they think of black people. And these are all white participants, by the way. And then finally, the pipeline. The pipeline is a lie detector. So what's going to happen is participants are hooked up to an actual lie detector. They have the wires and the electrodes hooked up to their arms and hands. It connects to like this big printer. And the researcher tells them, this is an active working lie detector. We will know if you're lying. All right, we will know if you're lying. In all reality, the participants are not, even though they're hooked up to this machine, the lie detector is not really detecting anything. It's not real. But the participant does not know that. And then after they write their stereotypes of black people down, they have to say, do you endorse it on a scale of -10 to 10? All right. And so that's what this is here on the y-axis, this endorsement of those attitudes or of those stereotypes you have. And so what's going to happen now is you see the results are pretty clear. If you're in the public condition, so this is the condition where you just say out, like, I think black people are aggressive. All right. And then, okay, do you endorse that? No, I don't. That's what people will say in the public condition. No, I don't endorse that. The stereotype exists, but I don't believe it. When they had to write stuff down. All right, so that's going to be the private condition here. When they wrote stuff down, they would write, black people are aggressive. Fold up their sheet of paper, turn it in. And then the next question would be, do you endorse that on a scale of like -10 to 10? Like, do you believe what you wrote is true? People would be like, yeah, I believe it because I wrote it 10. Moving on. But what's interesting is look at this pipeline condition. So this is the pipeline and the public are the same thing. The only difference is in the pipeline, they're hooked up to this fake lie detector. And now what's going to happen in the pipeline condition is people are like, what do you think of black people? Oh, they're aggressive. Do you endorse that on a scale of -10 to 10? And remember, we can tell if you're lying. People are like, oh, 8. Guess what? That is significantly different. It is significantly different. And so what's interesting about the pipeline is that it is a way that if you're suppressing your attitudes, so you're making them implicit, you're keeping them secret, the bogus pipeline is a way that we can undo that because participants are led to believe like, oh, I better be truthful because even if I lie, they'll know. So I got to be truthful, and that's what they'll say. And this picks this up. So the bogus pipeline is a really neat idea in terms of a measure to predict these implicit attitudes. So there are other measures, but these are the main two that we're going to talk about are going to be the IIT and the bogus pipeline. All right, so that's it for attitudes. So for attitudes, that's the A. So remember, A, the affective part, that's prejudice. B, the behavioral part, that's discrimination. And then finally, C is cognitive, and that means stereotype. And what's just like for the attitude, remember the attitude lecture when we said that the affective piece is about feelings? Well, the cognitive belief is about facts. Well, it's the same thing here. So these are going to be the facts that you believe to be true. Like, for example, I can tell you my own personal stereotypes is that I think young women drivers are really bad drivers. That's my own personal stereotypes, right? And so what's going to happen is those stereotypes that I have are going to influence my behavior. So if I see a 16-year-old female driving, I'm going to be like, oh God, I just better move over so I don't get in a car wreck with them because they're probably going to hit me, right? Or they're probably going to be texting on their phone or whatever other stereotypes I have, all right? Now that's my own personal stereotypes, and that's fine. None of you fall in that category, although a lot of women in the U.S. do, and all over the world do, right? And so this is one of those things where it's my own personal stereotype, and you can have your own. Now, the thing that we have to understand is how we deal with this. So, what we have to do is we have to use theory to predict when stereotypes come and what they mean for behavior. So there's two pieces to this, okay? So the first is going to be Devine's two-step model. Now, Devine's two-step model is all about the automatic processing of race. And so in her theory, what we have is we have two things. Number one is automatically, so if you see a person, doesn't matter who they are, a black person, a white person, a Latino, who cares? If you see somebody, you are going to automatically process their race, and that's going to bring up stereotype thoughts, right? Check. That's the automatic part. It comes automatically whether we like it or not, or whether we know what we're doing or not. It's automatic. The control part is, do we have the ability to suppress it, like disregard those ideas, or to change them? All right. And Devine says we have these two things. So here's what she did to test her model. In 87, what she did is she had high prejudice people and low prejudice people come in. These people completed measures to define them as high versus low prejudice, right? So they use these explicit measures to assess this. So they use these explicit measures and group people. Some people are highly prejudiced, some people are not. And then what they said is I want you to describe a black person. They did that. These are all white participants. Sorry. They did that. And what they found in their model is these numbers. Now, these numbers, these are called eigenvalues. You don't need to know that. But any number, any eigenvalue, any one of these values above 0.5 means that the stereotype exists. So when white people were asked, describe a black person, they came up with poor. Oh, there you go. They came up with, what is happening? Okay, they came up with poor, aggressive, criminal, low intelligence, uneducated. Like, these are lazy, athletic. And what you see is that for all of them, even the low prejudice people and the high prejudice people agree that these are the stereotypes that you come up with. And so this led Devine to say, well, these are automatic then. So even if you're the most bigoted person ever, or you're the most tolerant person ever, you're going to have these stereotypes. But what separates, so that's the automatic part, but what separates a low from a high prejudice person is the low prejudice person, even though they have these stereotypes, they don't act on them. They suppress them. They keep them to themselves. They don't do anything with them. They can even change them. A highly prejudiced person does not do that. So even though these stereotypes come, nothing changes. And so what Devine said is we have this thing where we have genuine prejudice, which is right here on the left side. That's going to be your automatic expressed prejudices. And then what's going to happen is you see the arrow going to the right. That means you're going to express it. You're going to discriminate against someone. However, if you can control it, that means you are suppressing it. And if you can suppress genuine prejudice, then you will not, and I repeat, will not express that prejudice. So if everyone has these automatic stereotypes, but you can suppress them, that means that you're not going to discriminate. You're going to be a tolerant person. But if you cannot suppress them, you're going to be a bigoted person. And that's what Devine said. And this is her model.